I'm Judy Russell and welcome to this discussion about the Global Design Challenge for Sports and Physical Activity. I'm joined today by three UCC greats. Dr. Fiona Chambers, the Head of School of Education, Morgan Buckley, the Director of Sport and Physical Activity, and Patrick Fitzpatrick, Emeritus Professor in the Mathematics Department, all in University College Cork. These three came together very early on in the pandemic and decided to set a global challenge that would ask people to come up with ideas for the future of sports and physical activity. So Fiona, I'm going to start with you. How did this idea for this global design challenge come up and how did the whole thing start?
So we were, as you know, we're living in this pandemic, but actually for us in our profession, we're living in two pandemics at the moment. So we're living not only with COVID-19, but also with the issues around physical inactivity and sedentary behaviour. So we were really between a rock and a hard place, and many people were giving out and saying this is dreadful, etc., etc. And I think it was one Sunday night at the end of April, I thought, okay, I have an idea in my head as to what we could do about this. So I sketched out an idea which was around crowdsourcing ideas for incubation. So it was literally just that. I had an idea of what the process could look like, but really what I needed to get around the table were the people who might be able to help with making this a reality. So we started off with very small, I suppose, meetings to start with, and then that became a magnet for many, many more organisations to come around the table. In all, we had about 22 organisations, including Sport Ireland, and this was very much driven from UCC. And you'll see Pat Fitzpatrick and Morgan Buckley were very central to all of that. So what was very cool about that is we knew we had a problem. We weren't quite sure exactly what the problem was. We knew we had maybe a mechanism of trying to address something, but we weren't sure what that something was. So what we decided to do was to turn to our research skills, and we actually spoke to the various stakeholders who were now vested in the concept, if we call it that, and they basically turned to their stakeholders. And we asked them to ask them the question, what are those burning issues that are there for you in COVID-19 for sport and physical activity? And what was really, really fascinating is that they actually came back to us with really things that surprised us, actually. So we were glad we did it. And they spoke about issues around how people were moving now because of these issues with COVID-19 particularly, how they were using space in sport and physical activity, and also how they were interacting with each other. So what we saw was from the data, there was a real fear, but that was opposite a social hunger to be with each other. And we also saw a myriad of different golden threads running through that, from things like inclusion, culture, religion, ethnicity, gender, all of these types of issues. So what we did then is we came up with the actual, I suppose, how might we statement, that design challenge to drive this forward. So we called it basically, or what we called out as the issue was sustainably redesign sport and physical activity for children and families, the young and the not so young, for participants, spectators, fans and community groups, so that it's inclusive, accessible, attainable and fun during the pandemic and also afterwards. So once we had that there, we then started figuring things out in terms of what would the process actually look like. And we came up with a 6-stage process. And that 6-stage process was everything from launching to registering for the actual challenge that we had set out. And there was also a fabulous hacking space for 72 hours for teams, a judging phase, a matching phase where partners found teams that had come through the judging process, and those partners then helped those teams to incubate their ideas. So we had a huge number of teams that decided to help us with this challenge. So we set it out as really, it was like a hackathon, a giant hackathon across the world. Can you help us with this idea? And we weren't wedded to whether you were a sport enthusiast or not. We didn't care, actually. We just wanted lots of discipline areas to come around it. And what we decided to do was to try and really, I suppose, to create a real frisson of excitement around it. And we had some fantastic expertise to really help us and to get those teams to have a bit of confidence around doing this, because some had never done it before. So first of all, we had a platform called DevPost, and we were given that for free by Richard Murby. He allowed us to use it for free, and that's the biggest hacking site in the world. We then, once we had that established, we turned to yourself, Judy, because you're an expert in pitching, and we knew that it was really going to be on that pitch that they were going to be judged. We wanted your expertise in that, and you're the best person for that. So you give a free webinar on it, and I gave a free webinar on design thinking, which is my expertise. And what we were asking them to do during the hacking phase was to actually use design thinking to define the problem within that challenge that they thought they could solve. And then not only that, to actually come up with a solution to that problem. And that was the kernel. So their pitch was about what's the solution. And then once that happened, they moved, all those 187 teams moved into the judging phase. There was a myriad of judges from all over the world. Many of them, which is really fabulous, were from UCC. They were alumni from UCC who came running back to help virtually, rolled up their sleeves and said, oh my goodness, I want to help with judging. I want to help with mentoring the teams. Tell me how I can help. And they were just so astonishing in how generous they were with their time. And once that process of judging happened, we were left with about 37 really fabulous teams that could actually move forward. And then the dance began. And the dance began over 2 months, where partners danced with those projects to see, was there a match? And by the end of September, we had matches in play, and then they went into incubation phase. So it was really gorgeous, I suppose, process of, in a steady and slow way, first of all, from the frenetic hackathon, to slow it down, find the right partner, and now the partners are incubating. And what we're hopeful, and we can see some of it coming through now, we've 19 teams now steadily in that incubation phase. And we're hopeful that some of them are going to come through and really have impact on that one pandemic, which is the fact that we have physical inactivity and sedentary behavior. So we're hoping for that. And we think that it's really looking very positive with the numbers of teams that are still in play and in process. And those teams, just to give you a sense of it, they're from 40 different countries and they're from 12 time zones. And they literally have said it was the best fun, and it is the best fun they've ever had. They came up with really, I mean, some of them would say wacky ideas, but as I would call them, red chili ideas that really matter and that could have traction in this really interesting innovation bubble that we're situated in. So it was really interesting. One thing I do want to call out, we created such a stir in May with all of the partners that came around the table, that UNESCO and the World Health Organization and the Commonwealth Secretariat knocked on our door and said, can we have a look at what you're doing? So we were kind of a bit taken aback by that, but really thrilled. And they're still watching what's going on, with a view to seeing, is there a possibility that what we're doing, the machine we've created, this global design challenge, is this something that could actually turn out some really interesting innovation in this very strange time. So it's been really a privilege to be involved in it. In terms of platforms that we used, Judy, we were crazy and we were silly. We used so many crazy platforms to try and make this work. We will learn from that. So we are going through a phase of reflection, and we have been going through that. So if I give you just a sense of some of the stats in terms of what we've been doing, we've been going now 6 months, and I think we have about another 6 months to go until incubation is over. We had 187 teams, 37 finalists. We had 8 winners, 19 teams are incubating, 40 countries, 12 time zones, 12 mentors, or we used to call them dream weavers, 22 partners from across the world, 43 on the organization team, and about 10,000 hours, volunteer hours given to the project, including your good self, your good time as well, across the teams and all of the rest. And the last piece was those 3 international observers. So from the back of an envelope to that is kind of magic. And I know that my other colleagues will share some other good news around where we're going to next. So yeah, kind of fabulous.
From an outsider looking in at the start perspective, what I kind of noticed about it was, firstly, that it was global, that you opened up this challenge that was open to anyone in the world, and secondly, that it was something that was so positive. And it was just something like, now that everyone has a little bit of time, why not come together and brainstorm some ideas and see what you can come up with, like you said, because it's almost a double kind of pandemic, or a double-edged sword in terms of sports and activity. But another thing is that I shared a post post that you had lovely social media and design, and I shared a post on LinkedIn, and a friend, another mobile journalist, he actually joined in on the challenge, and he's based in the States, and I was just amazed then. And then you guys were working with him, and it just all seemed to be so fluid. But Morgan, it probably wasn't as easy as it looked from the outside. How was it from your perspective?
It was like a snowball that started off very small and gathered a huge amount of momentum until we had a big iceberg heading out down the river. It was phenomenal. I think what was really interesting, Judy, was first of all the energy that Fiona brought to it and the design thinking. I think that was really important, and we all sort of applied design thinking principles. What was fresh, innovative. I think we were lucky that it was at the first stage of the pandemic in the spring when people were more into using technology and Zoom, and there wasn't a sense that we were into a second or third wave. And I think we were lucky with that because there was energy around that time. I think it's slightly different now in terms of, and maybe some of the ideas that we generated are more needed now than then. What we all did was, after Fiona came up with the inspiring idea, we all then said, well, who do we know and who can we reach out to? I'd spent 25 years working in the sport, physical activity industry. I lived in New Zealand for 8 years. I ran a sports management business in Ireland before joining World Rugby, where I worked as general manager development. So we all reached into the virtual netbook address books and started pulling together contacts. And I had a lot of colleagues, for example, the Sport for Life group based in Canada, who I'd done a lot of work with on long-term athlete development, the APO group in Africa, who have a reach across every country in Africa in terms of an online media presence, pulled together people in sport. One of them had a huge network in terms of Kazan action plan design, and work in all sorts of different areas. And once we pitched the idea to people, they said, yeah, what do we need to do to roll up and come on board? So at the end, we had partners from the National Outdoor Education Centre in Cappenlee. We had, as I said, Sport for Life groups in Europe. There was a big network that we all tapped into. And once we did that, then we project managed it, and lots of different ideas came together. It was incredibly exciting. Also, one of the challenges that we identified is like building the airplane in the sky with no wings. We were putting the wings, the seat, the windows on as the plane was flying. We found a pretty cool video that sort of described that. But I think what it really was a collaboration where people said, right, we do need some innovative thinking. Sport, probably the sport and the arts have been two of the sectors that have been really hardly hit in this environment. They're very dependent on people. They're very dependent on people congregating and coming together, also like the tourism industry. And they found that a real challenge to see, how do you reimagine sport? And we're still suffering. If you look at a lot of the live sport that's happening at the moment, and the empty stadiums and the canned noise, there's something vital missing. The absence of people in sport and physical activity is causing some just vital ingredients that we always took for granted. So it needs some new ideas and new thinking, and then it's going to need those to be applied into the spring of next year to see how do we reinvigorate sport to come back. The whole concept of social distancing, I think, has taken the life out of sport, and how we're going to reintroduce people back into that in a safe way. It's going to really need some imagination. So I think what captured people was, right, are there different ways of looking at this? Some of the organizations that have been really challenged are those traditional sports bodies that have got the very structured pyramid. They've been around for 100 years. They've had the same sort of model from one year to the next, where you progress from school to club to international level. And all of a sudden that pyramid is completely shattered at the moment because that progression isn't happening. There's a hunger as well for people to be active and be involved in sport, physical activity, but they just can't do it with social distancing. So a lot of the ideas that we began to generate are really timely. So I think it was very exciting. It's also daunting then to see, how do you put these into practice? How do you put them practically into place? But there's no shortage of ideas, and the mix of technology, connecting people online, and then finding different ways to reimagine space and look at new problems, look at old problems in a new way was particularly exciting.
You know, as we talk about, I suppose, sports and physical activity, Pat, you were mentioning before we started recording that there's also a connection to the Sustainable Development Goals. Would you mind kind of speaking to that and how this applies to that?
This is something that's very close to my own heart because I was involved in the setting up of the Centre for Global Development at University College Cork, and that was in around 2010-11. The Millennium Development Goals were up to 2015, and then the UN sat down and thought about what sort of goals would they like to have for up to 2030, and they came up with 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and they cover all sorts of things like hunger, education, food, water, gender equality, inclusiveness, climate change, and all of these things. And we were really, I mean, I didn't know about this before, but we were really lucky to get in contact with Catherine Carthy in IT Tralee, who is the UNESCO chair. And I'll just tell you, she's UNESCO chair for inclusive physical education, sport, recreation, and fitness. So that's a really important thing. And she introduced us to the Kazan action, well, introduced me, I hadn't heard of it before, the Kazan action plan, which was the ministers who have responsibility for sport and physical activity in the various countries in the UN. And it was a UNESCO group got together in Kazan in Russia in 2017. And they applied the idea of sport to sustainable development. They said that first of all, sport should be inclusive. It should be for everybody, and they developed a certain number of activities that would support that. They also said that sport should be safe, and the integrity of sport should be protected, the governance, the anti-doping, the protection of children, and so on. But the third area that they identified was to maximize the contributions of sport to sustainable development. And they called out a dozen activities that would specifically target the various sustainable development goals and how sport and physical activity can contribute to those. The idea of sport as something that brings communities together, that helps people to maintain a level of physical activity, health, and so on. All of these things are really important, and that was a great vehicle. It resonates very strongly with UCC's support and UCC's policy of looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and looking at our activities through the lens of the Sustainable Development Goals in general. So I think it resonated then with the projects, because we asked them, we told them explicitly that we were identifying the Global Design Challenge in the context of the Kazan Action Plan. So they had to go and look at it, and they had to go and say, well, how is our project connected with these things? And we asked them then afterwards to identify which of the Sustainable Development Goals their specific project was going to support. And that meant it's a really interesting connection then. And one of the leading in fact, the winning entry was something. It happened to be from Ireland, and we had an international judging panel, so there was no preference given to any particular country, and it was to do with setting up something that would be a physical education health quotient, as it were. And that Fiona, you might be able to explain that a bit better.
So it's basically like everybody's familiar with the EQ and the IQ. So what they came up with was a personal well-being quotient, which is, as Pat has pointed out, it is linked to physical activity and other elements of well-being. And that was really, really novel, and it fits magnificently into a UNESCO project where they've identified how to measure community well-being, but they actually on that continuum have no way of measuring personal well-being. So this Irish group came up with something really, really unique, which they're testing through the Gaelic Athletic Association, through the GAA at the moment, and they're having those conversations and incubating with UNESCO as we speak. So that was very novel, very needed, and fits within, I suppose, the kaleidoscope of agendas within UNESCO, but it had a perfect spot to fit into, if you understand me, in completion of that particular well-being jigsaw. So kind of very nice, and really what they've said is the Global Design Challenge flushed that out. That was a project running nicely, etc., but it catapulted it up to the level of UNESCO. And that was really something actually, Pat, that I know we discussed with Morgan and Pat, the fact that there were people who were in these projects who would never, ever get to talk to UEFA, would never get to talk to TAFISA, which is the Sport for All association internationally. They'd never have those conversations. But yet, this particular global design challenge, in that dance moment when they were doing their dance, they had a direct line into those people to start those conversations.
I never would have saw the link between the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals and sports and physical activity. But now that you say it, it kind of becomes quite obvious with all of kind of the healthy kind of living kind of SDGs and stuff like that. So that's amazing. And then Morgan, I just want to ask you, I suppose, about the future of this, because I think I'm allowed to say it, that you've been very lucky to secure some funding. So would you mind speaking to that for me, please?
Yeah, in early September, Sport Ireland and the Government of Ireland announced a scheme to try and sustain sport and make sure it's sustainable into the future. They're very conscious that sport finds itself in this very tricky position. So they put together a range of different strands of funding and invited applications. And UCC Sport is a member of Student Sport Ireland, which is the national governing body for third level sport. And through Student Sport Ireland, who came on board with this project, we applied for Strand 4 of the government funding, which is a sports innovation fund. And we were very lucky to secure funding for the project that will allow us to take what Fiona's, I think, quite rightly described as being a huge volunteer effort with a lot of ideas, but a massive workload to see how do we take this and pilot the whole programs and the initiatives that we've got into something more sustainable. Sport Ireland played an active role in terms of promoting and helping with the design of the project, along with Cork Sports Partnership, which I also chair, and other agencies. And they're very conscious that sport needs investment as well as ideas. So we've been able to secure investment for the project to take this to the next level. So currently we're working on a business plan. We're looking to engage project management support to take the ideas, and ideas are only good if you translate them into action. What did they say? Vision without action is a nightmare, and action without vision is chaos. So we want to combine both and make sure that we've got vision and action and translate the really good ideas into something that is sustainable. So it's fantastic to get the recognition and fantastic credit to Patrick and Fiona particularly Fiona for the idea. But the team then that's come on board, we're able now to say, okay, how do we take the crazy ideas and translate them into something that's really practical? I think what's also worth noting is we've had a lot of interest from agencies, big sports agencies, for example, UEFA, from UN agencies, as Pat has outlined, that say, look, there's something in this. And we think that the design challenge and some of the methodology can be applied in a more structured way to some sports sectors. I've come from the rugby sector previously, and they're really struggling. So, but you can't do that completely in volunteer effort as we all hold down our full-time day jobs. We now need project management support to take the ideas, the concepts, and put them into something that really can be grabbed hold of and put into action. And I think great credit to the Irish government. I've got colleagues in sport all over the world, and they're going, gosh, the Irish government has really put its weight in behind keeping sport alive. So the Innovation Fund, there's funds for governing bodies. The local sports partnerships are administering grants, small grants for clubs to keep them doors open. So every club in the country can apply for funding to keep their door open, to keep just the basic glue and fabric. And I think what we've learned is when you switch those lights out, it's very hard to get them going again. Can you imagine a landscape without art, without sport, without physical activity? It becomes pretty bleak. But a huge infrastructure has been built up, and we've got to keep that going. So I think great credit to Sport Ireland and the way they've turned that around. And as I said, we now have got some resources that we can use to get the snowball really rolling down the hill even faster.
And Fiona, based on the success of this model, do you think that it's something that could be taken and then applied to other issues? So, for example, housing shortages or climate crisis and things like that?
Yeah, you see, that's the beauty of it. So what we first of all, I suppose our mantra is that we now have a machine that can actually not only produce ideas, but it actually can bring those ideas into an incubation site and develop something for impact. Ideas are cheap. You can flush out buckets of ideas. And what I suppose the goal here is if you can translate them into something that's actually meaningful, and I mean real impact, not kind of a nod to impact. I see that we could actually apply it. I'm just there's a few different ideas that we have here, but we've seen that we could actually apply it in a mini way. So to micro challenges, for example, within particular sporting areas, so attached to basketball or soccer or whatever the issues are. You could also then start applying them to other kind of very big ticket items, which are around the performing arts, which I know Pat has alluded to and Morgan has alluded to. So in other words, what you're trying to do is just lift this 6-stage model. Once I suppose we're going to trial it, as I say, one more time, and we're going to fine tune it and make it as tight as possible. And literally, this agnostic model could be lifted and put to any use. And that's my dream, actually, that people would trust it enough to say, yeah, okay, we have a pathway through to flush the ideas out, a really fun hacking piece, a really rock solid filtering through the judging part, very tight matching. And then we have this gorgeous kind of tracking for impact all the way through the incubation piece of it, through that innovation funnel that we call out. So I think that what we have really, I suppose, celebrated in this particular model, this machine we've created, is that design thinking is our superpower in a pandemic. Design thinking is not only a mechanism to create ideas for impact, it's a mindset, a way of living, a way of being, a way of maintaining positivity, a way of kind of channeling, I suppose, the energy and power that we actually still have, even though we may not realize it in a pandemic. So it's channeling all of that into really good use, that lovely kind of global village idea where we can reach to anywhere in the world, we can pull teams around the table from all different disciplines, and we can fight for what matters for this planet and for humanity, which is, as Morgan calls out, those performing arts, the fact that you can participate in sport, but also the more serious issues around climate change, around homelessness, around poverty, and all of those things that are actually called out in the SDGs, all those things that we're supposed to be trying to tackle. So the answer is yes. And we are going to run this again. We're going to run this next year. We're going to tighten it further because that's the spirit of design thinking anyway. We applied it to the design of the actual model, as well as actually encouraging people to use it in the hacking phase. And what we are asking for anybody listening to this conversation, please, can you think about what could you offer next year? Okay. Are you somebody who would be a partner, a really serious partner that could help incubate projects? Are you somebody who'd like to hack the challenge that we're going to set next year? Are you somebody who thinks, okay, I think I'm pretty good at mentoring. I have a lot of skills there. I could actually mentor some of the groups. Where can you help us? So think about it. You have a few months. Think about it. You'll see it all over social media. You'll see it, in every platform that we have. Global Design Challenge. You may see it with sport and physical activity tagged onto it, or maybe the performing arts or something else. But we need you to try and put your shoulder to the wheel, get those ideas out there, and to work together to try and resolve what we're living through at the moment. I call it an innovation bubble. It is an innovation bubble. It's difficult, but can we just turn the energy into positive energy? I think we really can. That's what humans do really well, I think. So let's do it.
Thank you so much, Fiona, Pat and Morgan, and thank you all for watching at corkdiscovers.org and celebrating European Researchers' Night with us. You can find more talks and activities and demonstrations at corkdiscovers.org, and we'll see you again.